In 3, 2, 1.
This is Doug Plank, former Chicago Bear. You're listening to Brags in the Stands.
I will not talk about George McCaskey's clothes anymore on Brags in the Stands. I repeat, I will not talk about George McCaskey's clothes on Twitter or on Brags in the Stands. But we got a GM. Let's go. With the Bears, they started this new tradition last year where they celebrate their wins the correct way.
Bottle and Sylvie, ESPN 1000, don't miss it.
I know what you mean.
It's like their own Philly.
Okay. Okay, I think what it is.
We shouldn't be showing this. Am I crazy?
What a great sign that is. What have I told you? 17 minutes of rain would wash away 108 years of drought.
Do you see this team growing into the team that you were in 2005?
Good practice, everybody.
You are ridiculous.
is, ladies and gentlemen. That is Justin Fields with one of the biggest highlights of the 2021 season. And now we finally found out who the GM is that's going to have to build this team around, a magnificent talent like Justin Fields. And there he is, Ryan Poles. And, he has Bears ties. He actually was a practice squad player. So, he comes from the Kansas City Chiefs front office. And now he is the man in charge of building this next generation of Chicago Bears, moving past the Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy era, and now moving into the Ryan Poles era. And we shall see who the head coach will be. But all of it surrounds how are you going to build your talent around Justin Fields, your franchise quarterback, your diamond in the rough. And that is going to be the task of one Ryan Poles. So I am your host, Gregory Braggs Jr. Of course, everybody is getting fired up today on Bears Twitter, but now we finally have, some vision as to what the Bears are going to do. And we don't have to yell at Greg anymore for his clothing takes. I read this at the start of the intro, and we can get to that later. But, George McCaskey met Ryan Poles at the O'Hare Airport Terminal yesterday. He got caught on video, and I had some takes about that, which we'll get to later. But I want to bring on our guest who was on for the last time, our last Bears show that we did, where we talked about the end of season presser, and he did a fantastic job. Our guy, Jordan Silveira. Am I saying that correctly? Silveira?
Yes. Silveira, you got it, sir.
Silveira, I got it right the first time. I shouldn't have questioned myself, but I want to make sure I do well here. So welcome back to the show, Jordan. You did a great job the first time through, and you were giving me a little bit of nuggets yesterday where there was some, smoke in the air that Ryan Poles might be the guy that's introduced as the GM. So I thought you'd be the perfect guy to bring back on here today, because I don't bring the information. I'm the fan in the stands. I'll bring the great video highlight from Soldier Field, and I'll give some terrible takes on Twitter. But, as far as the information guy and the analyst guy, I take a step back and I, will graciously give you that floor. So, what was your reaction, when you saw that Ryan Poles, I'm going to mess this up probably 900 times, but Ryan Poles, don't call him Ryan Pace, was announced today as the general manager of the Chicago Bears?
Well, Greg, as always, thanks for bringing me on. I got to razz you a little bit. This is Ryan Poles is the love child of Nick Foles, Ryan Pace.
Yes.
This is going to be a Ryan love affair. And the reason I'm going to get into that is, well, we just moved on from Ryan Pace, moving into Ryan Poles now. And a little back-known story about Ryan Poles is he used to block for a Matt Ryan at Boston College. He was his left tackle. Ryan Poles.
A lot of Ryans.
Yeah, all the Ryans. Quarterback, left tackle at Boston College. As far as the initial reaction this morning when I found out he was becoming GM, I got to be honest with you, it really wasn't this morning. You and I were talking about it last night. I actually put out a long thread last night saying that you can basically book it. When you have an owner on a Monday night at 11 or 12 midnight, he's got billions of dollars to pay for Uber, personal private drivers, etc. And he decides to get in his car and drive himself to the airport at midnight to pick up a GM candidate. It's done. Book it. So in regards to the initial reaction, I've had some time to stew on it. I am not upset. I want to be clear about that. But you're not going to find me jumping, on a pile of joy here, because I don't think that he was probably the best candidate. But I don't want to make it sound like he's a bum. That's not at all the point. He's a solid candidate. He is very well valued across a few different organizations. He actually interviewed for the Carolina GM position last year when Scott Fitterer out of Seattle was awarded the position. But he was a finalist there. He actually was a finalist as a GM for the Giants before they chose Joe Shane out of Buffalo this year. Although he was third place, it was considered that Adam Peters and Joe Shane were neck and neck, and Ryan Poles was third. So that gives you an idea how he was viewed there. And then really what this can be seen as is a battle between our favorite division rival, the one that we can actually compete with from time to time, which is the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings had Ryan Poles tabbed along with Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah. It's basically
You
second.
nailed that pronunciation on the second guy. You are.
Thank you.
You really are good at this.
Thank you. Kwesi is the second in command, assistant GM, if you will. That's not his official title, but he's been set as second command behind Andrew Barry. He was essentially neck and neck with Ryan Poles in Minnesota. The plan was to have Kwesi come in today to interview in Minnesota, Ryan Poles tomorrow, and then make a determination there. As you can now see, George McCaskey came in, scooped him up, made a power move, and said, look, you're not getting to Minnesota. I want you here in Chicago. And so now that leaves a situation where we have Ryan Poles as our GM. Woohoo, at least we're making progress. And looking like Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah will be likely Minnesota's GM. Sorry for the ramble, but
2
just
years in a row now,
story.
the Bears are kind of pulling the rug out from under Minnesota because, there was a lot of rumors that Minnesota was getting ready to take Justin Fields, last year in the draft before the Bears traded up ahead of them to take Justin. And now they are, essentially jumping up in front to get Ryan Poles before he leaves the building and goes and interviews in Minnesota. So really interesting. Are you surprised at all? You mentioned he may not have been your first general manager candidate in your opinion. Are you surprised that George McCaskey went with another younger type of hire, a Ryan Pace-esque type of guy, as opposed to someone that's been in the business a little longer, maybe with a little longer of a resume?
It's a great question. Admittedly, I'm not surprised. This is the Chicago Bears we're talking about. I don't mean to sound negative, but this is the same old song, same dance, same routine, same bad news Bears. I don't mean to be a doom and gloom guy here. This is not my point. I actually think that we may see some success out of the hire, but I can't be surprised when history tends to repeat itself. We look back to 2015, and sure enough, we were firing head coach and GM. Consultant Ernie Accorsi was hired from the New York Giants to help lead the search. And ultimately, we landed upon Chris Ballard, who's now a very successful GM in Indianapolis, or Ryan Pace. George McCaskey decided to elect the outside GM. Ballard had come up as a Chicago Bear. Decided to elect Ryan Pace, the young, impressionable guy, charismatic, as his GM. And sure enough, here we are, where admittedly, I'm not even sure how much Bill Polian was probably pulling for Ryan Poles. But I think in some ways you can see back, I believe that Ernie Accorsi at the time in 2015 did not have Ryan Pace as a number one choice. I think he would have opted to go elsewhere, and George and Ted made an executive decision to go Ryan Pace. I think you're seeing something like that very similar here, which is if you had it Bill Polian's way, I'm sure he'd like Morocco Brown or one of those Indianapolis guys. And here we are with George stepping out of the line again and going, well, I want my young, impressionable, charismatic guy from a super successful organization. New Orleans with Pace, Kansas City with Poles, and here we are electing to go with Poles.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is interesting pulling from the Kansas City tree. We just got burned by that with our head coach, in Matt Nagy, but at the same time, with the Chiefs being to 4 straight AFC championships here coming up on Sunday, it's, we all obviously strive and we're hoping that Nagy could get that blueprint over to Chicago, and that was a complete failure, but certainly not, certainly a culture and an organization you want to try to be like, although they have shown with their unique and insanely talented players that it's hard to duplicate that. But at the same time, he was in the room when they took all these players. So he, has a say in some of the, evaluations they did to bring these guys into the house. So, maybe even more so than a Matt Nagy, who was, a quarterback coach, offensive coordinator for a few games, under Andy Reid. This is a guy that's in the front office that's highly respected. So certainly it'll be interesting to see, of course, he's got to have Bears ties. That always happens, right? He was a practice squad, or not practice squad, but a training camp guy, training camp body, so to speak, undrafted. And, who knows, back in 2008 when he was here, maybe a young Braggs in the training camp stands was running around asking. I might even have a signature on a throwaway football or flag, back when you stood in the line and the players came down, and he probably very well could have been one of them. I mean, who knows? If I check my old Polaroids, I might have a picture with this guy. Who knows? But, of course he had to have the Bears ties, and that's okay. it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds. As I said, the biggest task is to build this team around Justin Fields because you get a head start. That's the thing that intrigues a candidate to want to come to Chicago. Other places a GM, has to start from scratch and find his quarterback. We're seeing, you watch that Mahomes versus Josh Allen battle in the final 2 minutes. You need a quarterback if you want to win a Super Bowl in this day and age in the NFL. And the Bears right now, whether you believe in him or not, or if he's shown you enough in his first year, the Bears have a quarterback here. They're not looking to draft one this year. So you have a bit of a head start. And now your job is to build around him. And we've had we had the question in the chat, who will he hire for head coach? And that's obviously the $1 million question, the first and foremost question that you're going to have. Me personally, I wanted them to go an offensive route. I know a lot of people were banging the table. It's not an end-all, be-all. All that matters is that you have a coach that demands, respect, and, he's a leader and he's a culture type of guy. And I totally understand that. That obviously needs to be a part of the criteria, but I get worried when I hear these defensive candidate type coaches that are the candidates because, let's say they bring in, Eberflus, or let's say they bring in, the defensive coordinator, Dan Quinn from the Cowboys. I was talking with my guy, Shane Marsaw from the Tape Never Lies Network earlier, and he suggested, hey, if we get Dan Quinn, maybe he brings in Mike Daniels from San Francisco, who I'm intrigued by. I don't know much about this guy, but I've watched San Francisco all year long, and I love the way they run their offense. And granted, Kyle Shanahan has a lot to do with that. But then you hear, a couple of his pressers that people are putting out there on Twitter, and you're like, dang, this guy's kind of smart. It's kind of that DiFilippo love. You fall in love with that one little clip where you see how sharp he is, young, fresh mind kind of thing. And that's great. You get a Dan Quinn, then you bring him in because they have ties from when they were in Atlanta together. But if he turns Justin Fields into a monster, now you lose him a year later, and that's my biggest concern going the defensive coordinator route is building a system that sticks offensively in Chicago. Because at the end of the day, you can have a great defense, and the Niners are certainly shutting a lot of people up when it comes to, hey, you got to win with offense first. But at the same time, the Niners are holding on by a thread. They barely beat the Packers. They didn't score any points on offense and somehow beat Aaron Rodgers and the Packers. I think the snow and ice had a lot to do with that. But, you do need quarterback play, I think, ultimately to win a Super Bowl. Maybe the Niners prove me out wrong, so be it. But I think the path of least resistance is having a dynamic quarterback with an offensive system that fits that. So, what are your thoughts? I know that was a lot of rambling there, but what are your thoughts in regards to that? And who do you think he is going to peg as his head coach, or maybe some of the different candidates you think Ryan Poles has in mind, as opposed to who you have in mind?
Sure, absolutely. I think that, by the way, not rambling, I think it's great information there. By all means, if you want to give me a floor to talk about Mike McDaniel in San Francisco, he is a stud. I love Mike McDaniel.
Me too.
Admittedly, I'll get back to Bears in just a second. I think the Dolphins would be wise to scoop up Mike McDaniel. He's a rumored candidate there with a few others. Vance Joseph out of Arizona, the defensive coordinator there. In regards to head coach candidates, I think that you're looking at, I'll give you 3 offensive and 3 defensive with reasons behind it. Now, I think before I start there, it's important to focus on process. And admittedly, that's probably the area I'm most negative or scared about with Ryan Poles. And it's nothing to do with him as a candidate. It's to do with the organization we root for. It comes from a scenario where I think if you look at history in 2015, Ryan Pace was this green GM who came in at 37. Ryan Poles is coming in at 36, will be 37 later this year. Very similar in that respect. Been a lifer at one organization. He's been in his entire time post-college, post the Bears, cutting him right before the final roster. He did a little brief stint, had a cup of coffee at Boston College as a GA, graduate assistant, but then basically was with the Chiefs ever since. Ryan Pace, on the other hand, for example, was with New Orleans the whole time. So just for the audience here, the process that is worrisome is that in 2015, they hired this young, green, inexperienced GM and essentially arranged a marriage for him. and said, look, you're green. You need to kind of get your feet up under you, learn how to be a GM. And so we really think the best opportunity here would be for you to go with one of our consultants' best guys, Ernie Accorsi's best friend, John Fox, a real vet Grizzly coach that'll help kind of steer the ship and be the North Star for the team and help build the culture where you build the team that you want. And ultimately, it wasn't necessarily a marriage that worked for Ryan Pace and John Fox. It actually led to quite a bit of dissension. As we remember, Mitchell Trubisky was picked in 2018, I believe it was, 2017. And it was a situation where John Fox never even knew up until the day of. And, that's not the relationship you want to have working. So admittedly, I'm a little worried that you're going to have either George, Ted, or Bill Polian coming in and trying to stamp their name on whoever the head coach is going to be. So really what we need to hope is that Ryan Poles is getting the autonomy to choose his guy, the guy that he really wants. That would be the big focus for me. If you're talking about 3 candidates, though, I'll give you a couple from both perspectives. One is if he is given the autonomy, and the other is if you're looking at Ted or George making the decision. I guess I'll start with the doom and gloom. If Ted and George are making the decision, I think that you could lock yourself into Jim Caldwell as head coach. That's the former Colts and Detroit Lions head coach. He's actually been relatively successful, but he's an old guard coach, offensive guy, was previously an offensive coordinator with Brian Flores in Miami, but then had to leave due to medical concerns. So he's an older guy, but he wants to get his hat back in the ring as a head coach. He's been interviewing a few places. So I think that that's probably the answer you're going to see if we don't see Poles get the autonomy that I think he deserves. That's your
similar to them telling Ryan Pace, hey, you need to hire John Fox here your first time picking a coach.
Correct. On defense, if you're looking at it that way, if for some reason Bill Polian, to be fair, I think Bill Polian would bet his chips for Jim Caldwell due to the Indianapolis relationship, as well as for defense, Matt Eberflus. Bill Polian has those Indianapolis connections. So I think that if you're looking at Polian, Ted, or George stepping in and declaring the arranged marriage, you're looking at Jim Caldwell or Matt Eberflus. If you're looking for the autonomy that I think Poles rightfully deserves as GM, I think that we can just draw on a couple connections he's had. As I mentioned earlier, he went to Boston College, was Matt Ryan's left tackle. Matt Ryan's the Atlanta Falcons quarterback. His head coach was Dan Quinn for a number of years. Matt Ryan was actually Ryan Poles' best man at his wedding. So they have a real close relationship. So if anybody's going to know about Dan Quinn and the type of coach he is, it's going to be Matt Ryan, who's best pals with Ryan Poles. The other option, which, admittedly, I think you had me on last time and I went deep on this, is Brian Flores. Brian Flores was a linebackers coach, I believe, at Boston College, I believe either while Ryan Poles was playing or left a year before, but there's a connection there. Ryan Poles has actually spent some time under Scott Pioli. He's kind of, this isn't meant in a negative way, but Ryan Poles is somewhat of a zombie or a cockroach, if you will. He doesn't die. He's been able to be resilient and withstand numerous regime changes in Kansas City, and so he has some experience with Scott Pioli, a former New England executive. So in regards to the Brian Flores, he's a tough coach, kind of New England way. I think Ryan Poles understands that, knows how to work around that. And then as far as offense, I think you're looking at possibly the Kansas City guys. You're looking at Doug Peterson, Eric Bieniemy. Just a week ago, it was thought that Ryan Poles would for sure be the GM of the Vikings and that he would be bringing Eric Bieniemy back with him to Minnesota as the head coach. So sorry to ramble. That's, I think, the comprehensive look. The coaches.
No, you always bring the heat 2 times now, back to back, bringing the heat on Braggs and Stands, and we appreciate that because, this is what the Bears fans are wondering. You see that Jim Caldwell is in house today here in Chicago, meeting with them now with the GM in place. So you start connecting some dots. You would hope that they wouldn't make such a rush decision, but at the same time, they've already been interviewing these candidates, and it's very likely. The head coaching candidates, but it's very likely when they were talking with Ryan Poles, they're asking him his opinions. Obviously, when you're doing a, interview to see him as the GM, okay, who do you want as coach? And, if Jim Caldwell was at the top of his list as well, who knows, it might be that's how they connected the dots to have him here the same day they bring Ryan Poles in and officially announce him as the general manager. So, certainly interesting to see how this is going to unfold. It's one step at a time, and Bears fans have been kind of wringing their hands here the last week as far as who it will be. Now we at least have our answers, and we can start to get on to the next question. Once we get the head coach in place, now we can start about worrying about filling the roster and building around Justin Fields, which is ultimately the most important thing for this short-term goal, or at least the next 4 years. Who knows if these guys will work out long-term 10-year kind of deal with the head coach and GM, and let's hope they do. But the short term is to make sure you turn Justin Fields into a superstar in this league. And we've seen enough of, a lot of Bears fans at least feel like they've seen enough where, he's fully capable of that. So, if I'm the GM, I'm looking to add at wide receiver. Darnell Mooney did a great job last year, getting to 1,000 yards for the first time in his career, but he needs help. Allen Robinson, really, it's obvious he's not coming back to Chicago. He's a guy that, as the year went on, was almost a non-factor on the offense, and you see him doing a lot of subtweeting and things of that nature. But, you need that guy next to Darnell Mooney that's like what we thought Allen Robinson would be for the Bears. It's unfortunate that Allen's career kind of, fell off the way it did last year. So I think he's on the way out. I'm a big Chris Godwin fan. He just got hurt with Tampa Bay here at the end of the year, but I was a huge Chris Godwin fan. I thought he would have been a perfect fit. Then you add in the draft maybe a David Bell. I got the Boiler jersey here behind me basketball-wise, but football-wise, bring in a David Bell type. But those are the things that'll be answered after they get a head coach, and it'll be interesting to see how all that breaks down. I got my guy in the chat, Matt Mahalski. He's a big diehard Bears fan, goes to every home game, tailgates hard. If you're ever in Chicago, Jordan, I'll have to take you by the Chicago Bears Tailgating Club. They do a fantastic job, and Matt's one of the Hall of Famers of that group. Him and his dad, Ken, are great people. They cook amazing food. He's mad at me right now because, you're at work, and I'm home playing here, talking Bears here with Jordan. But, Matt, if you're a bricklayer, or at least on my crew, we wait this winter out. It's, negative 6 degrees outside. I know Matt's an electrician or something like that. So I don't know what you're doing. He can hide inside, but there's no heat in these houses, Jordan. So he's mad at me, but at the same time, I don't know why you guys are out there either today. It's way too cold. There's, 6 feet of snow on the ground, and it's negative 6 degrees. Stay inside, hang out with your family. But, it'll be interesting. We also heard, today that from Albert Breer, he was on ESPN 1000 saying Sean Payton, might not come back to New Orleans. I'm hearing some rumors about TV gigs. Albert Breer shot down that I guess Sean Payton said he does not want to come to Chicago, if you believe what Albert Breer is reporting. So for me, that's a little bit of a disappointment because the guys at the top of my list, going back to what we talked about the last time you were on, is Jim Harbaugh 1, Sean Payton 2. Those are the home run hires. Then these other guys have question marks. Those are 2 guys I can buy into.
Sure.
Going back to my Jim Harbaugh obsession, because I'll never give this up until it's official and I have no more hope. Either Jim Harbaugh signs an extension or signs with the Raiders, or the Bears sign and hire a head coach, for our team. Is there any chance that this new GM, Ryan Poles, comes in and says, I want Jim Harbaugh as my head coach?
I hate to burst your bubble, Greg.
You better give me a little something here.
I hate to burst your bubble. It's not going to happen. There's just a scenario where, again, I don't know Jim Harbaugh. I'm with you, buddy. If Jim Harbaugh could be our coach, he'd be my number 1 candidate, even over Sean Payton, honestly, just because he's a staff builder, a CEO type. But I can't help but look at Jim Harbaugh and say he's got options. And if he were making a move to the Chicago Bears, that vacancy's been open. If McCaskey and Jim have had a talk, had a discussion, it's been an open door for him to go, look, I'm leaving. I don't need to wait. I don't need to see the Raiders opportunity. I don't need to see the Dolphins. I don't need to see this contract. I have a free open door. And I'm sure that McCaskey would have said, look, come on in. But there's just a scenario here where I think you could kind of consider me off of the Harbaugh train as soon as Steve Ross out of Miami, the owner there, claimed that he wouldn't be taking Harbaugh away from Michigan. If that were the case, then either you'd assume he'd stay at Michigan, but then ask yourself this: Jim Harbaugh, Steve Ross, they're extremely close Michigan alums. if Jim had made a decision to leave Michigan, I'm sure that Stephen Ross would have heard that. And if you think Stephen Ross, who, guess what, Miami has a head coach vacancy, is going to say, well, I don't want to take you from Michigan.
Right.
But now you're calling me saying you're leaving Michigan? Yeah, go ahead and go take the Bears job. Go take the Raiders job. There's no way. There's just no way. He'd sit there and go, how much to make you my coach? Come down to Miami. You know me. We're friends. You know I'm not going to do you wrong. And come turn the Dolphins into a winning franchise like you did in Michigan. It's not going to happen for the Bears.
Well, that's disappointing, but I can see the writing on the wall, but I'm still holding. I'm like Spider-Man holding the train, holding on for dear life. And Matt's trying not to get fired at work. So, don't get fired, Matt. Just put the phone in your pocket. You don't have to see our beautiful faces. You can just listen in while we give you, a little instant reaction here to Ryan Poles being named GM of the Chicago Bears. I've only almost called him Ryan Pace one time. So that's pretty good. Considering my ADD issues. So, any other thoughts with Ryan Poles or tidbits or nuggets that you have before we get into, a little bit of silliness in regards to some of my Bears takes from earlier this morning? I know you have a bunch of nuggets. So if you have any, more useful information, for the fans that are tuning in, share away. And like I said, then we'll get into the goofiness of today's Bears Twitter.
Absolutely. So I think, one of the more important points that I'd like to talk about with Ryan Poles is that as a former offensive lineman, he gets it. He understands how important the trenches are for any team. I know that that's often overplayed. Everybody needs a quarterback or the wide receiver, the Julio Jones, the alpha wide receiver, Devontae Adams, the running back of Jonathan Taylor, Derrick Henry. But in the reality of football, honestly, look back at, Derek Carr's MVP campaign from a few years ago when he broke his leg with the Raiders, to Dak's rookie year and Zeke's rookie year where they went off, to any really successful team, the Chiefs this year, which we're going to get into with Ryan Poles. Every time that you're looking at a successful team, it's because they tend to have a great offensive line, at least for offenses. Obviously we talk about D-line and, you look at the 2 times Brady's been beaten the Super Bowl, even with the Eagles that 3rd time. You had Brandon Graham coming off the edge and Fletcher Cox and the 2 Giants losses. They had great defensive lines. So both trenches are important. In regards to Ryan Poles, I really don't think we can discount this or undertell it, which is the sense of the Chiefs this year. We all saw them get beat in the Super Bowl last year to the Bucs because, again, defensive line pressure. They stopped arguably the greatest quarterback in the league because they didn't have an offensive line to block. With some injuries, Eric Fisher was out, Mitchell Schwartz was out, but you saw in a 1-year turnaround, and nobody will really have the answer except maybe Brett Veach and Andy Reid how much Ryan Poles played in that decision. But in a 12-month turnaround, we're now seeing the Colts knocking on the door of the Super Bowl with an incredible offensive line, and that is due in large part to a massive turnaround from the front office in that offensive line to say, we're going to go ahead and let Eric Fisher, our former number 1 pick, walk. We're going to go ahead and cut Mitchell Schwartz, one of the best right tackles in the league, who's blocked Von Miller spectacularly, who's killing it in LA now, to saying, okay, we're going to go with Lucas Niang, our draft pick from last year. We're going to trade our 1st-round pick for Zeus Jr., Orlando Brown Jr. from the Ravens. And we are going to draft a 5-year center from Oklahoma who's there with Baker Mayfield, Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray. And we're going to plug him in at center. And he's been a stud. That's Creed Humphrey. And then a little sore spot for me as a Bears fan is they went ahead and picked Trey Smith out of Tennessee 5 picks after we took Daz Newsome. And Trey Smith has been as angry and a road grader as you can imagine at guard. People love Tevin Jenkins. You'll never find a bigger stand of Tevin Jenkins than me. But when we're talking about aggression and pure hatred for defensive linemen, Trey Smith embodies that. And the little fun nugget here is that they come from O-line masterminds, which is down in Texas with Duke Manyweather, Brandon Thorne, that group there. They scout and take care and develop some of the best offensive line talent year in and year out, not just in the draft, but pros coming there, Teron Armstead, Tyron Smith, Ryan Jensen, who Bears fans are all about as a free agent coming up. So he's well connected with the best offensive line gurus in the league. He obviously values it as a former offensive lineman, and to be able to see a position group that we desperately need to get better so that we can protect Justin Fields to let him go off and throw those 60-yard bombs. I think that that's one of the best things that Ryan Poles can add.
Absolutely, as Grant Jim Sims joins the chat, and they picked up Creed Humphrey, and he's been a big change there. And if you had to look at the Bears situation offensive line wise, and now with Ryan Poles coming in and kind of understanding, as you just pointed out, the way he handles his offensive line, would you put anybody in trouble, as far as keeping their jobs from last year from that starting offensive line? I'm looking at, I think the tackles obviously are going to be here, with Tevin Jenkins and help me out here because it's been a minute,
Larry
since
Borum.
Larry Borum, who did very well, and our offensive line coach spoke very highly of him, going into the season, at least to me, when Juan Castillo, when I talked to him at training camp earlier, very early in the season. I think they're safe as far as their, status on the team, whether or not they're starting. Obviously, I think Tevin Jenkins is going to be there, but I'm really looking at inside that interior line. I'm looking at Sam Mustipher at center, and then I'm looking at James Daniels and Cody Whitehair. Do you think any of those three guys are guys that are in trouble of maybe losing their jobs here, and Ryan Poles looking to go a different route?
It's funny you ask, because I think with the Ryan Poles hire, I've had kind of a little bit of a crush on this draft prospect prior to Ryan Poles being hired. But seeing as he is now the new GM, I'd suggest Bears fans all go take a look at Alec Lindstrom, center, redshirt senior center out of Boston College. They're both Boston College alums. The Bears need a center. Alec Lindstrom has risen to probably the second best center in the draft, because other center prospects, Ricky Stromberg, Jarrett Patterson, for example, have all returned back to school. So we've seen a scenario where it's essentially Tyler Linderbaum, at Iowa at the top, which admittedly, as much as centers drop, and I think it's a possibility, he's one of those rare centers. People love Jason Kelce. Jason Kelce is an incredible athlete, and he's one of those few centers that you can really pull because he's such an incredible athlete. Well, Tyler Linderbaum is that level of guy. So he may go to a variety of teams, but even if you're the Eagles, for example, who have 3 first-round picks, who have the opportunity to blow one of those on a Jason Kelce backup, it's not very often you get a chance to get your Hall of Fame guy, a protege, somebody who comps really well to him in the draft. So I know Bears fans love Tyler Linderbaum. I just don't see him making it to the Bears early in the second round. So I think an opportunity, and I'll give you a little unique one, is Alec Lindstrom would be a great option in the third round. I'm not sure he'll make it there. Centers tend to go in the second. A great option, and I really would vie for this because we need – I'll give you the positive and the negative. The positive about coming to the Bears as a GM is you kind of have a blank canvas. You have 30 roster spots to fill, and you can build the team however you want because there's so many blank spots, people not coming back. At the same time, you don't have a ton of money because of Pace's missteps with, various dead cap players and things like that. And you don't have a ton of draft picks. I think the Bears are in a very unique situation where they're sitting, I believe, at 39, where you may see some of these quarterbacks that don't go in the first round, and you may see teams getting hungry to move up to take those quarterbacks. And I think Ryan Poles could trade back, still pick up a David Bell, for example.
He'd be the reverse Pace. He would, instead of trading up and giving up picks, he'd be trading back.
Yes.
And bringing he's the
you trade back, you get a David Bell, for example, who we're both high on. And then, you come back in the third round, you get an Alec Lindstrom as center. And then, we're filling that wide receiver and interior offensive line spot. And nothing against Sam Mustipher, but again, Bears fans that are here watching, give a look to Alec Lindstrom, Boston College alum. It makes too much sense.
Makes sense. And Creed Humphrey went in the second round, last year. And he was a high prospect as far as that center. Not that I freaking know, but from what I hear and read.
He's a top 3 center this year. Like, he's incredible.
Yeah, well, that, certainly is, I think, somewhere they're going to be looking, as you said, especially with considering Ryan Poles' background. And, the idea is to get as good as you can around Justin Fields to get the most out of him here over these next 4 years. So certainly it'll be interesting. And again, I think you really brought it here again today with all the good information that I certainly was never going to, as I said earlier yesterday, I know nothing about Ryan Poles. But, what I do know is it sounds like a mixture of Ryan Pace and Nick Foles, and that worries me. And that's as far as my analysis goes, because I hear that name and I'm like, what sounds familiar about this? The Bears, are certainly, thought of as a cheap organization. May not always be the truth, in that reality, but they are viewed that way by some fans. And some people were joking that, he just picked another Ryan P, so he didn't have to change the nameplate on the door. It just makes it easier. But hopefully this guy has better luck than Ryan Pace did over his 7 years with the Bears. I thought Ryan Pace did a pretty decent job. Our standard is kind of low here in Chicago, but he did, overhaul a team when he inherited it that was at the bottom of the barrel, much more so than the Bears are at right now. And, he also got us Justin Fields here last year with some wheeling and dealing and a relationship with Dave Gettleman, who just recently retired. So we appreciate you, Dave and Ryan Pace, for hooking us up with Justin Fields on your way out the door. And now hopefully Ryan Poles can take the ball and run with it and turn this franchise into a respectable one and get us to, NFC championships where we can maybe beat the Packers, and things like that, like the Niners did last week, which was certainly a breath of fresh air for Bears fans and Bears, Twitter people. We were having a lot of fun with the Packers losing last week, and now we get a GM to now set our sights on our own issues, and not make fun of the Packers so much. But it was fun for a few days. Swanky really appreciates it, and
if I could go into one more thing with Ryan Poles.
Yeah, absolutely. Fire away.
For the audience that's questioning his, I guess you'd say, viability, his efficacy as a GM candidate. I know it sounds like I'm super negative on the guy. I want to be clear. I'm actually not negative on the guy. I'm negative on the process and McCaskey and Phillips. And it's been broken for a long time. So if you want me to admit I have a little bit of PTSD with the process, I do. Nothing against Poles specifically. I know that a lot of Bears fans were high on Morocco Brown, the director of college scouting under Chris Ballard and Ed Dodds in Indianapolis. And just as a little background for those that aren't familiar, Ryan Poles also has again, it's with one organization, but quite a broad experience level, understanding both the college scouting ranks and player development and player personnel. That's why I think that you can credit him to some of those picks like Trey Smith and Creed Humphrey, while also saying that he absolutely was probably a decision maker in the room with a Orlando Brown Jr. from the Ravens trading that first round pick. His resume, if you want to pull it up, Greg, you could, but just as I'll run through it quickly. Started with the Chiefs in 2009 as a player's personnel assistant, moved into the college scouting ranks as an administrator from 2010 to 2016, moved up to the director of college scouting in 2017, spent a year there. That is what Morocco Brown currently does with the Colts, and then moved up to the assistant director of player personnel in 2018 to 2020, and then moved up to the executive director of player personnel. So the way to look at that is while Brett Veach is the GM, and sure, he has final say, any moves that you've seen the Chiefs make professionally, not college scouting related, Ryan Poles is absolutely in the room influencing those decisions. That includes picking up a Damon Arnett, former first-round failed pick from the Raiders, picking up Mike Hughes, former first-round failed pick from the Vikings. Any personnel moves that you've seen, beyond just the big names of Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, Patrick Mahomes, any of those guys likely have some of Poles' fingerprints on him. So he's well-versed in both the college scouting ranks as well as player personnel.
Awesome. Then we also had, the NFL Network was giving away some of their thoughts on it too. And this is Mike Garofalo and his thoughts on Ryan Pace, and I'll share that with you the old school way.
Have targeted Ryan Poles, the chief executive, this according to me, Ian, and Tom, as their next general manager, and are working toward a deal to make him the GM before he gets on a plane and goes to Minnesota to interview with the Vikings. So the 36-year-old Ryan Poles, who once signed with the Bears as an undrafted free agent, is now going to be the general manager of the Bears, one Ryan taking over for another. Poles in place for Pace, who was let go after this previous season here. So now we look forward to see who he's going to hire as the head coach We reported yesterday that it is Jim Caldwell, Dan Quinn, and Matt Eberflus as the guys that the Bears were targeting for second interviews as their head coaching finalists. So there's a lot of buzz for that guy right there, Dan Quinn. A lot of talk that it might wind up being him, Ryan Poles and Dan Quinn, as the combination to take over for the Chicago Bears. So let's keep an eye on that. But right now, Chicago moving toward the finish line with Ryan Poles, a guy that George McCaskey picked up at the airport last night wearing a Bears jacket. He's catching some heat for that on Twitter. I have no idea why. I think it was really cool.
Wait, who had George McCaskey had the jacket on and he's taking grief?
Holding a sign that I believe had Poles' hometown on the sign. Like, it didn't say Poles, it said his hometown. So he showed up in Bears gear and jeans. I don't know what people expected him to wear.
I think that's a nice touch.
Cool. And there it is, Mike Garofalo, segueing us to our next point. As long as you've made all your Ryan Poles thoughts, at least the serious ones, because I thought that was pretty funny. Mike Garofalo calling out Bears Twitter for taking issue with some, or not all, some are, stable thinking human beings. And there's other people like me that are crazy. And when they see a video like this go across Twitter last night, as George McCaskey is walking with Ryan Poles through the O'Hare Airport terminal, I just couldn't help but think when I saw it, and Mike Garofalo is kind of, pointing to this, that a lot of Bears fans have something to say about it, but it just was silly. It just seems so goofy. And it's so George McCaskey. Don't get me wrong. As somebody said, we've seen him, dressed in, Kevin White jersey tucked into his belt, on draft day. So none of this is surprising. We know who George McCaskey is. I've seen him a million times on game day walking through South Lot dressed like this. And, he's at training camp and everything else. And this is normally how he dresses. So it's not a surprise at all. But at the same time, I just couldn't help myself. I mean, you see the whole regalia. He's got the jacket, which is a sweet jacket. I want that jacket.
Send me one.
I would take the jacket. It's sweet. But he's got the Bears mask on and then the matching Bears shoes with the Bears shoelaces on it. It's just funny because we're a $3 billion organization. I know it's midnight at O'Hare, but it just is. We are viewed as the mom and pop shop of the NFL. And a failure of one too. It's not like it's working out here in Chicago. And George, they're both, dressed comfortably. It's midnight and they're at the airport. I get it. It's not that serious. But at the same time, George is his boss, right? And I don't know. If it were me and I was running the team, I'd probably dress a little tighter. That's all I'm saying. It's not like the end of the world. But at the same time, he's just such a fan. And he said that, when we did our last show at the end of season presser, he goes, hey, first he went on to say that he's going to be the one evaluating the GM and the head coach. And then he also mentioned, I'm just a fan. I don't really necessarily know how to evaluate because, I'm just a fan. And people, the media immediately pressed him on that. And then fans have been going crazy with it ever since. And this attire just speaks to that even more. Like, it's like, my dad picking him up or something. And, it's just, I like that he goes to the airport and that personal gesture. But if you dig deeper into it, like I said, the optics of us being a failed mom and pop organization, this just only continues that narrative. He's not in his nines. I get it. Again, I get it. It's midnight, but that was my initial thought. It wasn't a serious one because I'm also making thoughts on Twitter at midnight. So nothing I'm saying at that time of night should even be taken seriously. But a lot of people woke up today and went crazy about it. And it's okay. We can all just go crazy. I'll go crazy about the attire. You guys can go crazy on me. And this can be the circle of life on Bears Twitter. We got to entertain ourselves somehow. But it was just goofy. And then I saw some funny things come across,
That's great.
This guy on Twitter put this up. This was maybe the funniest thing I saw of the day on Twitter. And shout out to my guy Bearman. No, George didn't steal your outfit, but what if he showed up like that? And I get it. Sandlin, I know there's nothing wrong with it. if we were a winning organization and George McCaskey was a winning owner and we were a successful franchise, it would be an endearing thing. Some people are still find it endearing that he's like that. But because we're such a failure and he is such a mockery at every one of his press conferences, I've seen him, some people have positive interactions with him. Mine have been hit or miss. I don't have to get personal with it. I've had some good ones where, I didn't know him as well and took pictures. And I think it's cool that he walks through South Lot. And then I've had other interactions where I'm kind of like, hey, you kind of jerk. I don't know. That's my personal opinion. But at the same time, everybody's entitled to their own when it comes to George. But that's the point for me, is just like, if he was a successful owner, this would absolutely be an endearing thing. But look at this guy. He runs a $3 billion organization, and he's a guy's guy. He's wearing the Bears jacket and the Bears shoes and showing up to pick up his guy. And isn't that just great? When you suck and you've been a failure for your 11 years as the owner, and you say you're a fan and you don't know, hey, I'm going to evaluate everybody, but I'm just a fan, and then I'm going to show up wearing all my fan gear. It just is. It is what it is when it comes to the optics. Now, if Ryan Poles is a home run hire, none of this will matter. None of it matters anyway. It was just an observation. But it's just funny, that people were kind of freaking out about it, all the way to the point that NFL Network took notice of it. So I wasn't the only one that had this opinion. Absolutely. George, that's what he wears. It's not a surprise if you know anything about George and the attire he wears anywhere. So it's definitely not a surprise. Like I said, he's worn a Kevin White jersey tucked into his belt. So absolutely a personal gesture, Grant, to go and pick him up. But that's my other issue that I get concerned about. Every time we hear about these hires, whether it's Mark Trestman or Matt Nagy, there's always got to be this sentimental love story that comes together, and that's why George and Ted decided to walk off into the sunset with them. And then that also becomes this problem where George falls too in love with his employees and then can't get rid of them when they're not doing the job, because he gets way too emotionally invested in the business that he's running. And I know I'm digging deep. This is what Bears fans do. It's ridiculous. You can roll your eyes. You can turn off the stream. I don't care. But this is kind of where I look at things with him. And everything for me is, it's with a fine-tooth comb. And it's like, I can already hear it now. He's picking him up, and he's going to have some story. He had the sign. If you see in the video, he's got the sign of can you pronounce the hometown that he was from? Canandaigua or whatever.
I can butcher it. I think it's like Canandaigua.
So he's from the New York upstate area. So that's the sign that he's holding in his hand, like a limo driver when he has the sign to pick him up.
It was so funny.
He's like, and so George is trying to make it like this sentimental thing, because that's what George does when he makes these hires. And it just, that hasn't worked, the sentimental value of what Nagy said in his presser or in his interview with George and Ted. He's a father of a bunch of beautiful kids and all that stuff. That's great. You want a guy that has high character, and you want a relationship that's positive, no question about it. But it doesn't have to be this love story, sentimental thing for you to run a successful business. He just needs to be good at football decisions, and I already know that George is going to have some love story for us when they do the presser to announce, Ryan Poles as the general manager of the Chicago Bears. And that's fine. That's how George does it. I'm just trying to point out, hey, this hasn't been working, for a long time. And I'm looking at the little things that are, part of the story. And none of these, have to do with anything. At the end of the day, if Cody Parkey doesn't hit his, kick, double doink his damn kick, maybe the Bears win the Super Bowl. And I'm, out there sculpting a statue of Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy outside of Soldier Field. So, it is what it is. I get it. he is a fan, and I that's part of why maybe you'd like him, but that's part of the why to maybe question a lot of the things he does for the Bears organization, because we don't need fans running the team. We need people, good football people running the team. And I get he's the owner, he's not going anywhere, but at the same time, these are part of the problem why nothing ever changes around here. And I hate saying it, but I just feel like, just like with the Cubs, when the Tribune company owned them for years, and then when they finally changed ownership, to the Ricketts, and the Ricketts certainly have their warts here nowadays, but they got the job done. And, they'll be building statues of all the players they picked and all the coaches they picked one day outside of Wrigley for getting that job done. It took change of ownership for it to change. The Blackhawks, the exact same thing. It took a change in ownership structure. And I just feel like at the end of the day, we'll see. I'm trying to be positive. I hope everything works out. I hope they pick the right GM here with Ryan Poles. I hope they pick the right head coach. I hope, Justin Fields turns out to be the greatest quarterback in Chicago Bears history. It's not a high bar. But until that happens, I'm certainly worried. And I just feel like, it's never really going to truly change until ownership is different. And maybe that never will happen in my lifetime. And I just have to hope that the Bears figure it out, through other ways, luck or whatever, or figuring out the righting their wrongs. Matt Mahalski says his mom still picks his clothes out. Yeah, his mom, maybe. Who's his boss, on the executive board. I get it. It is what it is. It was all silly. I had a lot of people coming at me today, yelling at me about how terrible of a thought it was, and I get it. It's different strokes for different folks. So I wrote on the chalkboard, as I said it to start the show, I will not talk about George McCaskey's clothes anymore on Bears Twitter. At least I don't think. I mean, if he shows up to the presser to introduce Ryan Poles in sweats and looking like a slob, I think people will then have an opinion on how he's dressed. But I guess we're nitpicking on how he shows up to the airport at midnight in O'Hare. Like some people were pointing out, that's true love. If you want to talk about it, Jordan, most people will never pick your ass up. If you're the closest friend or family, I will never come pick your ass up from O'Hare. Maybe Midway, it's an easier drive for me from there. But if you ever ask me to pick you up from O'Hare, I ain't going to fucking do it. So if George would do it for Ryan Poles, that shows real commitment and real love there, as people were pointing out today.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I have to be frank, and I don't know, call me a square if you want, or just boring, but I didn't see any issue with it. I mean, you're talking about, let's just flip the table. It's not like Ryan Poles was showing up to the airport in a suit. It's midnight. I mean, to be frank, I hate to say it, I think George kind of doesn't realize the figure that he is. I think he thinks he could have just gone to the airport, picked up Ryan Poles. Nobody was going to notice him, like a little mouse in the night. And he says it himself. He's a fan. I mean, I'm not going to grill the guy for putting jeans and sneakers on and a jacket of the company he runs. It's not like, I mean, thank God he wasn't wearing like some Nike pullover.
He didn't pay for that. He took that out of the team store too.
Yeah, like it's not a big deal. And I mean, if you want to sit here and grill the guy about his clothes, I mean, let's look back to the presser we did a Bear show on about a month ago, which was he was wearing a very nice suit in the presser to talk about the decisions going forward. I think it's all, much to do about nothing. And I think that, but I do want to say, I think you're on a really good point there about, and I don't mean to be the naysayer to Bears fans, but you should have all the apprehension and all the skepticism in the world, because I hate to say it, this is no different than the Ryan Pace scenario. You'll have some people say that they're not the same candidate. That's not what I'm claiming. It's just very, very virtually identical to the 2015 scenario. And yes, they always have, they love to cherish that mom and pops. We brought back a Chicago Bear into the organization,
right?
Which is why they're going to definitely talk about it. We loved what Ryan had here as a UDFA, and we were sorry it just couldn't work. But we've been eyeing him since he left and made a name in Kansas City. And admittedly, it's one of the most sad parts about the Bears is that they routinely see their homemade products, the people that they pick up, for whatever reason, they leave and become successful elsewhere. And then the
Right.
Bears try to come back in and say, do you want to come in and be successful for us? And sadly, I'll end with this for the audience to hear, but for a long time, it was thought that the Bears had a quarterback problem. I hate to say it, we do not have a quarterback problem. Not even before Justin Fields. It went back to the Jay Cutler days. We have an ownership problem. You can't be successful if you're constantly putting your finger into the soup and stirring it. And that's the reality here is you have George and Ted. Like, everybody thought it was some miracle for him to say, well, Ted's, going to be focusing on the stadium and I'm going to be leading the search. And meanwhile, you have him saying that when Matt Nagy approached him about the Justin Fields starting situation, he felt uncomfortable. So what do you think is going to happen in these GM searches or these head coach discussions when he starts feeling uncomfortable? It's going to go right back to Ted Phillips.
Right.
So, like I said, I don't have any reason. I love the Bears as much as everybody else. I don't have any reason to see them fail. I think the good news is this, and I hear this a lot too, is like, it can't get worse than Nagy and Pace. And I hate to say it. Yes, it can.
Be careful what you wish for. Before Pace was here, it was much worse at the end of Cutler's career. And when Pace had first got here, you want to talk about bottom of the barrel, not even caring who they play on Sundays. We were there.
Yeah.
We were at that point. At least now with Justin Fields and, and pieces around this team, you can see the light at the end of the tunnel if they are savvy enough to make the right moves, and that's their job to figure those things out. Sandlin is really chiming in here in the chat. He's very upset at me, like a lot of Bears Twitter, and that's okay. Hey, I have a lot of bad takes. Stay tuned. My guy, Little Kev, he'll be the first to tell you. But it was funny, as you pointed out, he thought no one would see him. The funny thing, if anybody knows George McCaskey, anybody from Chicago knows he dresses like this. So he actually stands out more than he would if he was just wearing I'm not saying like a tuxedo, but just like more of a professional look. Like he'd just be any other businessman walking through the terminal. But because he's got the Bears mask and the Bears, jacket and the Bears shoes with the Bears, shoelaces, no Bears ski cap, and it's negative degrees out there, George. You got to protect your ears. But, because he's wearing all that, it stands out even more. I bet you the guy wouldn't even have videoed him because Ryan Poles is just like anybody walking through the terminal, but now he's walking next to this guy that is wearing all this Bears stuff and looks just like George McCaskey. Well, all of a sudden, the light goes off in your head, like, oh shit, that's George and Ryan Poles. Anybody that is, even a halfway Bears fan would know this. So he actually, like some people were like, he's trying to be incognito. That's not being incognito if you're George McCaskey. It's ironically the other way around, but I get it. It's nitpicking. It's funny. It's off-season talk. Who gives a shit at the end of the day? I'd much rather, I'm focused on basketball right now. The Bulls have all these injuries, Purdue's top 10 in the country. I've been going to a bunch of their games. That's where my mindset is. But obviously, when it comes to who the Bears are going to hire here and the structure of the future of this franchise, this is certainly important. So, when I catch him at O'Hare, we're going to make some jokes about what he's wearing. And then, yes, of course, my guy, Little Kev, the prodigal son returns. Jordan, I don't know if you know Little Kev. He's on Twitter, and I blocked him on Twitter. He's waiting for me to block him here on the show. And I'm not going to do that, Little Kev. This is a new year. We talked about this, on the Trey Toon show. I'm bygones be bygones. I'm not going to put up with your crap on Twitter because you're too incessant. If you're looking at the chat right now, Jordan, you can see how consistent he is. But I'm not going to block you from the show. I just can't listen to you on Twitter. You or Will, your buddy Will. You guys are it's every day, never ends. So we're going to take a time out on Twitter. We can talk through the streams, but you're always more than welcome to tune in here. Or if I'm on the Trey Toon show and you want to give me shit, I used to call him Little Kid, Jordan, but I've let that go. He's now back to Little Kev. We're all adults here, and I'm not going to take any pot shots, and you can come at me all you want. But, I appreciate everybody tuning in today. We were having some fun with it. The love child of Ryan Pace and Nick Foles comes home to Chicago. Ryan Poles, don't call him Pace. Call him Poles, and hopefully he does a great job. and picks a great head coach. We did have some people, I think, that were tuned in a little later, asking once again, who is your prediction on who you think they're going to bring as the head coach. We brought up a bunch of names. If you want to scroll back after we end the show and watch back to what Jordan really brought the heat. The first 40 minutes of this show was less talk about wardrobes and more talk about the nuts and bolts of who Ryan Poles is as a GM. But I think, and I don't want to speak for Jordan, but I think Dan Quinn and Jim Caldwell are certainly at the front of this list, and maybe Matt Eberfluss is, maybe the dark horse candidate, all three being defensive type, or Jim Caldwell is not defensive. Jim Caldwell is offensive, but defensive guys in Dan Quinn and Eberfluss. So Dan Quinn has personal ties to, Ryan Poles. So I think if we're going the Ryan Poles route, they're going to go Dan Quinn. And if they go, Polian suggestion, maybe it's Jim Caldwell, for the more trustworthy hand, although Dan Quinn certainly has a resume and was in a Super Bowl. So certainly has a resume of his own right. So it'll be interesting to see, as my buddy Shane, again, from Tape Never Lies Network, Shane Marsaw pointed out, I think maybe an advantage with Jim Caldwell is, who knows if you can get him as offensive coordinator if you did hire a Dan Quinn or a Matt Eberfluss. But I guess maybe the advantage of having someone like that is that nobody's going to pluck him as your head coach unless the Bears turn into a juggernaut, being his, considering his age. He's 67 years old. So maybe he won't go anywhere and we can keep this offensive system intact, which is my biggest concern for Justin Fields. Because whether they suck, if the offensive coordinator sucks, you got to fire him and bring in a new guy. Or if he's great and turns Justin Fields into the next superstar in this league, you're going to lose him to a head coaching spot. That's what concerns me about hiring a defensive guy as your head coach. But that was, I think they're going to go Dan Quinn personally. So that's my prediction. And then I'm praying, I think it would be really cool if Mike Daniels, the offensive coordinator from San Francisco, comes here, because everything San Francisco's doing, especially beating, Green Bay last week on the frozen tundra, I want every bit of what San Francisco's eating right now. And if Mike Daniels is the hot offensive coordinator, he wants to leave the Kyle Shanahan tree and start to make his own reputation for himself outside of Shanahan, I think that would be amazing. Who is your prediction or hopes as far as the head coaching hire for Ryan Poles?
Well, I do think I wanted to touch briefly, if I can, on some of the information that's been coming out from, for example, like Matt Spiegel of 670 The Score stated George McCaskey is going to let his new football boss pick the head coach. Ryan Poles is not going to be railroaded into an arranged marriage with the elder statesman like Ryan Pace was with John Fox. If Poles wants Jim Caldwell, he will have chosen him. You've got Jeff Hughes from the Bears blog saying very similar things, that indeed they are going to be giving Ryan Poles autonomy to choose his guy. If that is indeed the case, I think Bears fans should be elated. Like I said, I don't have any issue with Ryan Poles. He clearly was a popular candidate that was nailing interviews to be finalists 2 different years, 3 teams this year. As far as the Dan Quinn situation, I think Bears fans should be elated about that as well. It's a little hard when you have the negative stigma about Dan Quinn is that he had the 28-3 catastrophe in the Super Bowl. But
no way they should have lost that game.
Yeah. And when you look at Dan Quinn, I mean, God, look no further than what he's done in Dallas from their defense last year to this year. And you look at a guy like Micah Parsons, and Micah Parsons is an incredible talent, but it absolutely has been schemed up for Micah Parsons to be successful. If that guy can do that with Micah Parsons, what can he do with Khalil Mack, Robert Quinn, Eddie Jackson, Roquan Smith, Travis Gibson, Bilal Nichols, things of that sort, Jalen Johnson.
And if they get a Dan Quinn, do you think a potential guy like Jalen Smith, who I'm a big Irish football guy, and he had a resurgence after he left Dallas, do you think maybe he'd be a candidate to come in and fill, because they might go back to a 4-3, and then you have a middle linebacker, and then Roquan can be the Lance Briggs of this defense. Do you think that's something that could be on the table?
I do. And I actually think, whether it's the draft or it's a free agent pickup, and admittedly, I'll tell you, I'm more of a 4-3 guy than a 3-4, so I'd be pretty pumped for that. I just think you get a little more variety and a little more ability to stuff the run, but also play the pass in a 4-3. I know everybody's all high about the 2 high shell, middle of the field open Fangio scheme. I could talk your ear off about scheme and philosophy, but I won't do that today.
I wouldn't know what the hell you're talking about anyway. Although I did watch a breakdown of the San Francisco, the way they were running their defense, and had the two defensive linemen, where it would open up the middle, where then Fred Warner was able to roam and get to the running back and fill that hole, because Green Bay doesn't really run like outside zone that much. They're trying to come right at you. And that really was part of the reason why San Francisco was so successful last week. But that is the extent of any kind of scheme talk here on Brags in the Stands. But you're welcome to talk all the scheme you want. I don't know anything.
No worries.
Other than how I'm going to scheme that next Jack and Coke when I'm watching the Bears.
No worries. I won't bore you with the scheme. But as far as my preferred, I'll give you. I mean, if anybody wants to scroll back, I went through 3 offensive candidates, 3 defensive candidates that I think would be realistic options. For now, to answer your question, I'll answer with my dream scenario, and you're more than welcome to have me back on the show so I can ring the bells, sound the parade if we end up with Brian Flores.
Hey, I can promise you this, Jordan, when we announce our head coaching hire, as long as I'm still off work, with the frozen tundra of Northwest Indiana, or you're 2 for 2 here coming on, talking Bears, in this offseason talk, and we'll have to round it up with the 3 for 3. And you're always welcome, obviously, but when we get the head coach, you'll be the first one I talk to as far as coming on and talking about this. So
thank you.
Absolutely. But go ahead with your thought.
Yeah. So I think, and I appreciate the kind words, far too kind, but I think Brian Flores would be the ideal head coach. I know that that's a scary proposition. Everybody wants the offensive guy, but Brian Flores and Jim Caldwell used to work together in Miami, and it was very short-lived. Jim Caldwell had some medical issues. But if we saw a scenario where Brian Flores was the head coach, again, there's the Boston College connection, there's the upstate New York connection with Poles and Flores, and then you saw Jim Caldwell coming in as the offensive coordinator for Justin Fields in the offense, I think that would be the marriage in heaven. And as far as defensive coordinator, I think you'd either see a guy like, for example, Patrick Graham out of New York as an opportunity for the defensive coordinator. Or you may end up even getting like a Gerard Mayo from the New England Patriots. That's their linebackers coach, is the defensive coordinator. So I think that in a dream world, Brian Flores would be my guy. I've gotten many different threads on Twitter regarding why I think he's the right guy, particularly scheme-based and culture setter, things of that sort. So I think that would be the dream idea there. And you've got a few comments from the Factor One, and I did want to kind of just bring this up for Bears fans here. So with the hiring of Ryan Poles, we will indeed now we won't be giving them up, but when you hire a minority candidate from another team, that team does get 2 third-round picks. So the Chiefs will be getting a 2022 third-round pick as well as a 2023 third-round pick for the hire of Ryan Poles. Again, not from the Bears, but it's just awarded to them. And then another thing that was asked was, what do you guys think ultimately sold the McCaskies on Poles? Again, it's actually quite strange. I thought in many ways, for example, a different candidate like a Brian Dable, who's highly sought after, may get the McCaskies to pull the trigger and somewhat be hasty because they didn't want to lose out on a Brian Dable. What I think is similar in the case here with Ryan Poles is I think that George, as a fan, doesn't like the Vikings, doesn't like the Packers, and doesn't like the Lions. So when he heard that Poles was likely the head guy tomorrow in Minnesota, he stepped in and said, I'm not letting that happen. You're my guy. And apparently Poles interviewed well. He's obviously thought of highly with the Giants, with the Vikings, last year with the Panthers. So I don't think it was a hard sell. And obviously there's a ton of success from where he came from.
Excellent stuff. Jordan, I got to hand it to you. You're somebody I've just come to know recently here on Bears Twitter, and I pride myself on trying to know all the darkest corners of Bears Twitter and the ones that bring the light. And you certainly have brought the light here the last couple of times. I think you are, someone that Bears Twitter needs to get to know. You got a lot of good information, and you really do carry yourself well here on these platforms. A lot of people, that have never done this before. It's not so easy. It certainly wasn't easy for me when I first came on, but you're really good at articulating and, making it make sense to the simpletons like me. So I appreciate you bringing the heat. A few more thoughts. Matt Mahalski's in here, and he says Caldwell is a bum. And, I don't know how you feel about it, and I'll let you speak on it. But, for me, Matt, I guess on its surface, when I first heard about Jim Caldwell coming here, I definitely had some big concerns, and I probably wouldn't have gone as far to say he's a bum, but at the same time, I think of him as the former Lions head coach, and anything the Lions do sucks. So I don't want anything that has to do with the Lions. Same with the same reasons I didn't really want Leslie Frazier here. He was a failed coach for the Minnesota Vikings. I've seen this up front, going to Bears games. So why would I think that it's going to work out here? But I guess when you peel back Jim Caldwell's resume a little more, you understand that he actually had, three or more winning seasons. I think it was 3 out of the 4 winning seasons in Detroit. In the 1 year they didn't, it was when Matt Stafford was injured. So if
and by the way, he beat the brakes off of us in Detroit. Like, I know we weren't a good team at that time, but he bent us over and beat the shit out of us. Excuse my language.
And just more so, they were a winning team with Detroit. And that's probably a sell within itself, that he can make Detroit halfway respectable. And he did that. And he's had, other places. He was with the Ravens, correct? And he's had a successful resume if you really peel it back and look at it. So I don't think he's as much of a bum as he says, capital bum. I think that's wrong. At the same time, I would understand your frustration if we hire him. I'm going to be rooting for him if we hire him, because at the end of the day, I just hope they get this right. Doesn't mean it will happen, but I'm not going to be against it if it does happen right out the gates. Let's let the year play out. Let's see how it goes. Is he going to end up the same way as John Fox did? I mean, John Fox had a good resume when he came to the Bears. Didn't mean he was going to turn the Bears around. John Fox, I think, had less to work with when he first got here, but I wasn't too big on John Fox. I watched him in Carolina, and my buddy's a big Carolina Panther fan, and I used to call him a used car salesman just because he kind of talked like one, not because he lied like one, but just his raspy voice. Like, I don't know. I didn't like the John Fox hire, but these are my reasonings for things I don't like, and people that I actually, have analytic, reasons are totally different. I'm just a fan. Other people actually do their research. I'm just a guy that makes my observations from the stands and says, look at George wearing that goofy outfit. I don't like this guy. Like, other people actually have valid reasons, football reasons for criticizing someone. I don't. I'm just a fan being a goof here on Brags in the Stand. So I understand where you're coming from at the end of the day. But I'd have to agree with Tony here. Caldwell is not a bum, and we could do a lot worse at head coach, and we could do a lot worse as offensive coordinator. That doesn't mean that we couldn't do better either. So it's kind of somewhere in the middle, I think, with Jim Caldwell. So, we'll have to just wait and see if that's who if that's who they hire. Matt Mahalski also was the guy holding the Fire Nagy flag at Soldier Field and at Lambeau Field this year. So he's going to be, I guess, waving the flag right away. We don't need those vibes right out the gate. Let them earn that Fire Caldwell flag if that's what it comes to. Don't do it right out the gate, because that's just not helping anything. I don't have a suit on. I picked up Addie from school today, Jordan. I wore a suit to that, but I took it off for the Bears show today.
It's a free jacket.
I'm sorry. So, Sean Payton announces that he will, or at least it's reported that he is not going to return to the Saints and maybe take a year off from coaching in the NFL. So, it doesn't seem like Sean Payton's going to be on the table, unfortunately, for Bears fans, even though he is no longer going to coach the Saints. So that's somewhat of a disappointment, because you'd feel like the stars are aligning, the same way like Theo Epstein fell into our laps as Cub fans, when he left Boston right at the perfect time when we needed him. And you would just think that would just be such a perfect marriage. Sean Payton, here's Justin Fields, and you used to play for the Chicago Bears in those strike seasons when they had the scab players here. But I guess that's not going to be meant to be, but
it's not even possible, frankly. I just to add a little bit to that.
Yeah,
I mean, one, you'd have to trade a ton of capital to get him, and that's the thing, is everybody thinks that because he says he's not coming back to the Saints, that means he can be a coach. They didn't fire him. He is taking a leave, stepping away, which means just like players, Calvin Ridley, for example, if you want to go down like a tinfoil hat theory. Matt Ryan, Falcons, Calvin Ridley, maybe Ryan Poles finds Calvin Ridley interesting. We could talk about that. But in regards to the situation with Sean Payton, just like a player, he stepped away. which means the Saints have his rights for the remainder of his contract for whenever he wants to come back. So it's not some scenario where all of a sudden he's on the market and he can just go anywhere. You'd still have to trade for him. And if you think the Saints are just going to send him away for a 5th-round pick, good luck. I don't think that's the case.
Yeah. Ghost Rider, my guy in the chat. Double R, bear down, buddy. And yes, he said he was posting my link to this show apparently in their Twitch chat. Please do not do that. I appreciate the support, but I can carry my own weight over here at Brags in the Stands, and I don't want to upset, I don't want to ruffle the feathers of my guys over at ESPN. I annoy them enough, so we don't need my friends or my minions in the Twitch chat posting links to shows when they have their own stuff going on over there. But I appreciate the support. We understand you're not trying to be rude. Local love all day long. If they were smart, they'd hire Trey Tunes. And I'll just leave it at that. They should hire Trey to be their 12-2 guy, because there's nobody that's more talented and just brings an energy that just creates fun conversation than Trey Tunes, my guy. I got to shout him out. I gave him a call, see if he wanted to come on today, but he must be doing something. He did a show yesterday. So we'll see what he's up to here in the future, because I'm looking forward to doing a show with him here soon. But I think that's everything for me. I don't have a suit on today. All right, guys, everybody keeps asking me. I had the suit on when I picked Addison up from school earlier, but I had to take it off and get comfy for the show. Okay. This is the proper attire for a podcast show. Okay. And when you're working, this is the proper attire that you would see. He doesn't have a tie. I'm not saying nothing about that. You don't have to have a tie, but a little jacket, a nice shirt. I know Brian was in his comfy clothes, when he came, but he was riding on the plane. So when you're on the plane, you got to take the trip. So you got to wear somewhat comfy clothes, because it sucks riding on a plane. George is just picking him up. So, George looks like he just left a tailgate, so I
got to say, though, I know it's all jokes. I know it's all fun and games. But
it is.
It's one of those things where, I don't know about you, maybe we differ. I would come to appreciate a boss that was relatable, that tried to level with me.
It's like Michael Scott when he casual day, when he's got
I guess if George came there with a suit and was like, yeah, you're in a way, yes, I'm hiring you, but I'm still above you and I decide all your decisions. That's not the same relationship that I would feel. Imagine if you're Ryan Poles, you're getting off the plane and you're like, wow, he's coming to pick me up specifically. How does that make you feel? You're probably like, wow, I probably have the job.
There's a few different ways to look at that, though, because it doesn't have to be an intimidating thing. It could be like, I know Jerry Jones isn't successful. He hasn't won any Super Bowls, so wearing suits for him hasn't changed anything. But if somebody is about to become the head coach or the GM of the Dallas Cowboys and he shows up in his private jet and gets off the plane in his suit, A, it's a power move, and B, it's showing the guy you're about to hire, look what you're about to come into. Now, George wants a different, kind of first impression. He wants you to come in and feel like your family. Look at our, he's not going to call it mom and pop shop, but he's going to look at hey, we're all about family here, and I'm going to show up dressed comfortably to make you feel comfortable. And that's just a different vibe. And that's how he wants to do it. And that's fine. And as I said, if it was a successful organization, we'd all love it. I would love it. I would be the first one on here going, look at George dressed just like I would be for a Bears game on a Sunday. But because they're a failed organization, you have fans such as me saying, look at this goofball. This isn't professional. It's not, it doesn't have to be necessarily an intimidating factor. It's more of a, welcome to the big leagues kind of a look. That's all, just an observation. I know a lot of people really were angry with me this morning, but a lot of it facilitated into some really funny jokes today on Twitter. And that's all I'm there for, is for the laughs. I can have a debate here or there, but for the most part, I get annoyed once it turns into this snapping back and forth at each other, because people are so angry with your tech. Who gives a shit what I think? I don't even give a shit. I can tell you right now, my wife and my daughter upstairs, they could care less what I think. So I don't blame anybody on Bears Twitter for not caring what I think. So,
I mean, I'm reading a tweet right now. It says George rolled up in jeans and a Letterman's jacket and closed on his guy. What a boss.
And some people think that's Bruce Springsteen boss style. And then I saw another guy putting out there. He was like, I had a econ teacher that would talk Bears every day, and he'd wear his Bears jacket and his Bears shoes. And I thought back then that was being a bit much. He's like, I was 16. And so, there's different ways of looking at it. It's all silliness at the end of the day. At the end of the day, we just hope it's the right hire, and
Absolutely.
George can go hide up in his tower, and we don't have to see him for any post, firing press conferences or anything like that anytime soon. And that hopefully is where we're at, because we are seeing some tweets come across the line that certainly are encouraging. And one of them is from Field Yates. And he put from, Field Yates is from ESPN and co-host of the fantasy football show that everybody follows over there. And he said, this isn't a good hire by the Bears. This is an incredible hire by the Bears. This franchise is in great hands with Ryan Poles leading the way going forward. So, these are people connected within the league. And, we had other guys, Pete Sweeney, who's, a guy from editor-in-chief and lead Kansas City Chiefs writer for Arrowhead Pride, put all things I've heard from Chiefs translate to Ryan Poles being a steal as a GM. So a lot of different people out there, some close to the Chiefs, some more national, guys think this is an amazing hire, and that's great news for Bears fans. Certainly excited that we at least now have the answer. I can't tell you if he's great or not, but others do believe that. We did hear people praising the hire of Matt Nagy. That ultimately did not work out, but every dog has its day, and maybe it's the Bears' turn finally. We stumbled into a quarterback last year, and I think a lot of us are still very high on him. And maybe we just stumbled our way into a GM, and hey, let's go for the hat trick, and hopefully we fall right into a head coach falls right into our laps that some might disagree on when we hire him, but they all end up being home runs, and we're hoisting the the Hallis Trophy after the NFC Championship and the Lombardi Trophy after the Super Bowl, and get Virginia McCaskey, win one for Virginia, before she goes off into the sunset, and that would be the fairy tale ending I know George is looking for, because I think a lot of the stuff that George is motivated by is winning one for his mom before she goes, with all the lineage and history of this franchise and everything that her family and his family ultimately have brought to this team. So I'm rooting for that. I'm a Bears fan. I can't stand talking about them when they suck. So, we can have some fun with it on Twitter, joke about, Bears attire, and if you guys want to make fun of me, go right ahead. I can be the whipping boy. I can take it, especially from little Kev. I think he left though, because I wasn't paying attention to him enough. So Jordan, again, we hit the hour and a half mark. I think this is a good time to wrap it up. But, why don't you tell people where they can find you on Twitter or anything else you're up to, and in any final thoughts you have?
Sure, absolutely. I'll close out with a few final thoughts, and then I'll kind of give my shameless plug where you can find me. Greg's done a great job. I'm on Twitter. Well, I guess I'll start there. I'm on Twitter, Jordan T. Silveira. I love Bears football. If you want any news about Bears, I'm also an open book. Any questions you have, scheme, coaches, candidates, team, roster building. I'd like to think that I have an opinion. Doesn't mean I'm always right, but I do have at least some opinion with some substance and basis behind it. So if you're interested, just shoot me a DM, tweet, any questions you have, I'll try to get to it. In regards to kind of final thoughts, I'd like to leave you all with the idea that while I wouldn't say Pace and Nagy were the rock bottom, I certainly think it could get worse. Take some solace in understanding that it was absolutely the right move to move on from both of them. They both ran their course. And again, sure, it could tank further. But I also don't think that we were, riding particularly high with Pace and Nagy. So with a new regime, a new era, a new horizon on the fold, I think we should all take some solstice in the idea that give Ryan Poles, I almost said Pace, give Ryan Poles a chance to impress, give him some time and patience. He's 36 years old. First-time GM, probably going to make a few mistakes as well as a few successes. So give him a chance. Is the same respect with the head coach. Don't bury or praise a head coach too much upon hiring. If I need to remind you all, head coach can look astonishing in year one, as we saw with Matt Nagy, coach of the year. And even if we have a good or a bad first year with the new head coach in polls, somebody was saying, like, "Oh, wave the flag." No need to wave the flag. Give it some time. Give these guys a true opportunity to build the road ahead of them and see where we go. And I would say come to a firm conclusion 3 years in. I think that's really the honest, fair assessment for it. Greg, as always, I appreciate you. You're the man. Thank you so much for having me on.
No, I appreciate you.
Always
It's the middle of the day. Most people have jobs. And we're not to say that you're not working hard at what you're doing. Are you in school?
I am actually at work.
You're
I'm
at work?
being a bad boy. This is
Well, we'll keep that between you and me. I am on hiatus. I do have a job, but we're waiting out the cold in the winter because I'm a bricklayer. So available and able to talk some Bears and happy to do it, while I'm hanging out instead of just keep tweeting with my thumbs. Might as well come on here and yap with my lips. I know some people can't stand either, but hey, this is what we do. And Jordan, again, you bring a lot to the table. It's been a real pleasure having you on these last couple of times. And as I said, when we hire a head coach, hopefully it's in a time that both of our schedules are available and we'll come on right away and react to it, regardless when they do announce that hiring, maybe for the presser or whatever, instant reaction. Either way, you're going to be the first person I talk to have come on. Appreciate all of your insight. And again, I think people should really seek you out on Twitter, because there's a lot of different people that bring a lot of good information on Twitter. And I think that you're certainly someone that's I don't know if I could call it a rising star in Bears Twitter, but with all the information you've brought here these last couple shows, I think it speaks for itself. So I know a lot of Bears fans appreciate what you brought today, and I certainly appreciate it, because I know I couldn't talk with that much in-depth information. I can babble on about what George is wearing, but certainly not bring that kind of analytical approach. So I appreciate you very much today, Jordan.
Greg, you're the man. Thanks so much, and bear down.
Bear down. That is Jordan Silveira. Don't call him Silveira. Jordan Silveira, coming on here for Brags in the Stands once again, talking some Bears here in the offseason. So that was good stuff. Again, yes, Tony, listen to Jordan. He does a great job. Chrissy Kazmark, thank you very much. First time, we're just bringing him on these first couple times, and he's done a fantastic job talking Bears. So, I always like bringing different people to the table. Chris Sandlin, he likes them. You get the Chris Sandlin seal of approval. So that's good for you, Jordan, because Chris is a good guy, and he knows his stuff when it comes to Bears podcasts. So thank you very much, Bear Truth 9. We try to do our best. And Angelo here, great show as usual, even if you are from Indiana. Yes, indeed. But I am from the region, which is the Chicagoland area. So let's not get it twisted. And then, yes, Angelo, we got to get Butkus, we got to get Dick Butkus on here. I'd be lying if I didn't say, we're efforting those things. That has been the other thing going on Bears Twitter for me here lately, is me and Dick Butkus have created somewhat of a rivalry, a friendly one at that. He's gone from, like 100 followers to, I think now 120,000 followers in the last week and a half, a meteoric rise for an all-time legend in the National Football League, who, yes, I accused of being a fraud and a fake account on Twitter, and immediately had to eat my words with my big mouth. Surprise, surprise. I have to eat my words, when I'm talking out of my ass. Not a surprise. But somehow I've parlayed that into a little funny little rivalry that me and Dick have. So we shall see if we can bring him on. If I can, certainly would be an honor, but we'll see how it works out. I know a lot of people have been throwing him requests lately. So he does follow me on Twitter, though. So I get worried, though, when someone like that follows me on Twitter. It's like, are you sure you know what you're signing up for? Because this can get really weird here on Bears Twitter, certainly the people that interact with me. So Bear Truth 9 took an early lunch to watch the show. Thank you very much. Well, I'm glad you were able to enjoy it, and I'm sure Jordan was able to bring a lot of good information that made it worthwhile. So again, I appreciate all of you guys. we'll definitely be doing it up here soon again when they hire the head coach. Obviously, over to my shoulder here with the Purdue jersey, I'm fully enthralled in Purdue and Bulls basketball. It is basketball season for me right now, but we do are keeping our ears to the grindstone as far as who the next head coach is going to be now that we have our answer at GM. Buckus ain't ghosting me, Donnie, all right? Me and Buckus, we're like this, okay? Can't find a friendship like ours. We're like the odd couple, Felix and Oscar. So, like I said, Bear Cigar, a couple weeks ago, no one knew he was on Twitter, and that was why I questioned who he was. Then he starts tweeting a bunch, saying weird things like, is this Dick Buckus? He's really saying this stuff on Twitter. So I called him out on it as he was like climbing up his followers to a few thousand. Then he went on a radio show with his son Matt and confirmed it was him. So I immediately was like peeing my pants for calling out the great Dick Buckus, who, literally will kill you. And I had said on Twitter, like, if this is the real Dick Buckus account, not thinking it was, I said I would let Dick Buckus punch me in the face. And then it turned out it was him. So now everyone is very excited for the day that Dick Buckus is going to punch me in the face. I don't know if we're going to be able to facilitate this. I said we should do something for charity under that umbrella, but I don't know if Dick wants to waste his time with a jackass like me. But if he does, and we want to set up this kind of an event, maybe we can do it to raise money for his foundation, which I know helps people that go through heart disease and different health issues of that nature for the Dick Buckus Foundation. So we'll have to see what's going on in regards to that. But I always love having fun on Twitter, and that has been one of the funnier things to come across the Twitter waves here is this friendly rivalry with the one and only Dick Buckus. So who knows? You never know what you're going to find on Bears Twitter, as far as funny stuff to come across. But that's certainly why I tune in every day, but it's a good thing. Got to have fun in life. And that's what we're trying to do. So again, thank you to everybody that tuned in today. Again, I want to thank Jordan Silveira. Follow him at Jordan T. Silveira. Brings a lot of great knowledge to the Chicago Bears and a great conversationalist. So I think somebody that all of you should seek out on Bears Twitter and give him a shout out for everything he's been doing here on Brags in the Stands here lately. So again, that does it. The Chicago Bears have found their man at general manager. That's Ryan Poles. Don't call him Ryan Pace. Don't call him Nick Foles. That is Ryan Poles coming from the Kansas City Chiefs organization. So we'll have to get Johnny B, my co-host and great friend who's, living the dream off the big Chiefs win. He's a diehard Chiefs fan, knows a lot about their organization. Going to have to bring him on soon to see if he has any insights into Ryan Poles and maybe bring on a Chiefs guy or something like that to get some more information if we can in regards to that. But again, thank you to everybody for tuning in. Thank you to Jordan Silveira. This is Brags in the Stands. Be on the lookout for one of our upcoming shows. We do a lot of pop-up shows like this, try to fit them in when we can get them in. And when they announce the head coach of the Chicago Bears, we will make sure that we come on and give an instant reaction. So we'll catch you on Bears Twitter. Be nice. I know I'm an idiot, but I'm your idiot and you're stuck with me and I'm not going anywhere. So, we shall see what happens with the Bears head coach. So that'll wrap things up. I'm going to go eat some lunch. Got a dentist appointment here in a little bit. Going to hang out with the kiddo. Enjoy your week and always bear down.